Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be a veteran. I would love that last application that you had to look much younger than what I am today. Great to be back in Miami, Tom. Thank you for the invitation. I remember last year when we met here, we had just seen the outbreak of the Ukraine war. I wish I had predicted that because many things changed as a result of that. And I think we got one thing right in terms of prediction. I remember the conversation on stage where we said that there is power in the sense of freedom. I think we were right in that, and I think Putin was wrong. Now, a lot has happened since we met and discussed that last year. It's probably been the most intense year for me, and I'm a chairman. I'm not even operationally responsible. I'm non-executive chairman, and yet I've never had that many board meetings the last year. It's almost like tactical issues have become strategic in nature. So what used to be a discussion around supply chain and issues in a supply chain managed by the executive responsible for that became a strategic conversation in the boardroom about, how do we exit Russia? What are we going to do in China? How do we increase resilience in the supply chain? Where do we produce in the future? And so what used to be tactical has become strategic. To be honest, I'm pretty tired of crisis management. It's almost like 3 years of crisis management. It's time that we get out of the crisis management and become to lead strategically again, because we live in a time in this world where being strategic about where we're going as a business, not just tactical about where we are right now in this unpredictable world, becomes, I believe, very, very important. Now, one of the industries that I think we can learn from is Formula One, and I brought you this picture for two reasons. First of all, I spent a lot of money to put that SAP logo on that car. And this is a McLaren, and it did not run very fast. So I figured the best way to get some money back from my investment was to show it at every keynote I give for a couple of years. So there you go. We'll pause here and just let you enjoy the moment. Now, the car was not running very fast, and I remember Ron Dennis, who was the chairman and CEO of McLaren, he said, Jim, you shouldn't worry so much about that because it's the only car where the customers can actually see the logo when it comes running by. Now, Formula One has a very interesting aspect in terms of leadership because it includes two types of leaderships. It includes the leadership within a season where you're getting prepared for the next race, where it's all about managing the crisis and the chaos that can happen during a race, and about continuous improvement so that between two races, there's roughly 22 races in a season, you get just a little bit better and you continuously get a little bit better. And if you don't do that, you may win the first race of the season, but you will probably lose the last race of the season. And then something interesting happens. When the season is over, there's a new rule book, and you need to build a new engine, you need to build a new car, otherwise you don't follow the rules. You probably need to restructure most of your team. And as Ron Dennis often says, the fact that we have won 8 world championships is zero correlated with our ability to win the next world championship because it's a new season. We constantly need to reinvent ourselves. And I believe that that is exactly the conversation we need to have when we're in this tactical mode, in this crisis mode, where we're trying to manage within the season. And those seasons, we all know, they start with a great idea, then we scale those great ideas like we see C3 now scaling. Then we come to a moment of optimization where we try and increase productivity, efficiency, and profits. And then eventually the version we had is becoming irrelevant, at which point you need to exit or you consolidate that industry while someone will be potentially getting ready for the next season. Reinventing the idea, so traditional car, electric vehicle. And this happens over and over again. Some companies only make one of these circles. They only make one of these seasons, and they never get ready for the next season. Clayton Christensen called that the innovator's dilemma. And he's arguing that the more successful you are, the less relevant you are in creating the next season because you get too much in love with the season you already won. Now, why is that? Well, to answer that question, I look at myself and my role in the boardroom, and I look at what is it actually we're doing in those boardrooms where we're supposed to take care of the current while preparing for the next season as well? Well, this is how, such a boardroom might look like. Some of the ones I'm in are a little bit bigger. They don't look quite as cool as this one. But what are we spending our time on in those boardrooms is the question. Well, before the board meeting, we get a lot of material, typically a lot of PowerPoints. And the PowerPoints have a lot of numbers, very accurate numbers. And what are we looking at in that boardroom? Well, we look at the performance, the financial performance of the company the last quarter. How did the quarter go? We would often compare that to the budget that we had to see, are we doing well against the budget? How are we doing against the forecast? How are we doing against last year? And some might even ask, how are we doing against competition, which may be the more relevant question when we are in a very difficult to predict environment. Now, then we might look at collaboration and say, how satisfied are our customers and how is that trend going? Or how is our supply chain doing? In times of crisis, it may not be doing so well. What can we do to increase that? And unless you are a totally software-oriented company, you will look at your assets as well and say, how are they being utilized? And more frequently, we're being asked, how is our CO2 footprint going? Now, to answer these questions in accurate ways and put that all in the PowerPoints that are prepared for that board meeting, we have installed enterprise systems over many years. And, I am part of that as well. I spent 22 years of my career in the ERP space. These were the systems of record that basically help manage the transactions within the organization and have accurate records of what has happened in the organization and how that translates into financial performance in various different ways. We then added collaborative solutions, the CRMs of the world, and Tom was, the first pioneer in that, and then it went to the cloud because we are relationship managing. We need to connect to all these companies. We added supply chain management for our supplier connection and collaboration. And over the last years, we have then, if you are a physical company, been integrating that to the systems of the things, the Internet of Things, we call it, where we actually have sensors in most of the physical things in the world, and we collect all of that data as well. A very accurate, fine set of KPIs and metric to evaluate how the company is doing. But what are we really looking at? Well, I would argue that in that boardroom, we're looking at this little mirror. The data we're looking at, if I take my last board meetings in February, they were typically mid-February type. So they're looking at the data that was generated until the 31st of December last year, which means the data we're looking at is at least 1.5 months old, somewhere between 1.5 months and 4.5 months old. So we're not even looking at the rear mirror in what just happened. We're looking at the rear mirror, what happened a while ago. And if we then report the entire year, we're looking at data that's 13.5 months old. And that's what we use to make decisions in that boardroom. Isn't that fascinating? It's actually, the assumption that we're making in that boardroom is that the future looks like this. And maybe it used to, I don't know, before maybe I got into that boardroom, the future might have looked like this, but in today's world, I think the future looks more like this, I've actually sat in a racing car with a Formula One driver at the steering wheel. And I can tell you that I thought I was going to die. Now, he was looking out front when he was driving. Imagine he was looking at the rear mirror on something that happened a while ago. I know I would have died. And that's how we run companies today. Isn't that fascinating? Nobody had a plan for COVID and the implications it had. Nobody had a plan for the supply chain issues and the piling up of vessels in front of Los Angeles port. Nobody had a plan for inflation or even a war in Europe. So the plans that we're comparing the actuals to were wrong from the beginning. So what are we actually celebrating in the boardroom when we meet the budget? If the budget is wrong because the world changed between we made the budget and the actual. So I think we need to revisit this. And I do believe that while it's great to have an accurate record of what has happened in the company, if you really want to navigate the uncertainty of the world that we're in today and get out of crisis management that we've done for 3 years and begin to be strategic about what is the next season that we need to define? How do we reposition our company in a world that's dramatically different? It's more digital, it's more sustainable. Then we need to begin to predict the future. Now, in my boardrooms, I have a very simple rule that I apply after a few first meetings until they get used to me. And the rule is that we will talk about the past until lunch, and we'll talk about the future after lunch. And then management can decide when we have lunch. Just not too late. And I can assure you in the first couple of meetings, we had lunch very late that day because we tended to be obsessed with going through the PowerPoints that we already read, which were all full of the data which already had happened. And I began to change the agenda and force lunch before 12 o'clock. So we had sufficient time to imagine the future. And what if we could have tools that could help us predict that future? Not quite as accurate as the past, because we know there's a level of uncertainty, a level of likelihood. But what if we could use that data to begin to predict the future, and with that get prepared so we don't have to manage the crisis. We deal with a situation we kind of knew would happen. We may even avoid it before it happens, and we free up time to have more discussions about the future. So, the good news is that we actually now have technology that is able to enable that kind of conversation. And in particular, AI is going to dramatically transform the way we discuss things in the enterprise. Not by looking back at what has happened, but by beginning to discuss what will happen. Now, this ChatGPT is a good way of making sure people begin to understand the opportunity that's there, because it's quite astonishing. The other evening, I was with my son. He's 23. He's obsessed with this technology. We were actually making pizza together, and we were listening to Dire Straits on the speaker. And he opened ChatGPT and asked the GPT to compose a Dire Straits song about a man and a son making pizza. We got 3 verses and the chorus. It was a pretty good song. And now, for this meeting, I asked the following question: write a poem about AI in the enterprise in the style of Hans Christian Andersen. I'm from Denmark, so I figured that would be a good style. And here's what it came up with. I really like the ending. With AI as our guide, we can foresee the world we'll live in that's yet to be. From climate change to economic trends, the opportunities of AI never ends. Now, Tom called me a couple of months ago and spoke about this idea to reinvent the user interaction with enterprise systems. And he was kind enough to show how some of the SAP screens look like. Thank you very much, Tom. We always won the award for more information on a square centimeter of screen than any other company. And when he began to talk about this, and I had already used the GPT, I began to imagine, how could the boardroom look like if we had that kind of technology? How could we reinvent the conversation in that boardroom, maybe without any PowerPoints? So imagine a board meeting like this, no PowerPoints, just that little screen. And now board members can ask any question you want. We ask questions in human language. And what if we would ask questions about the future, not the past? What if we would like to ask, what is the most likely forecast for the next quarter? And what can we do now to improve it? To do that, you need access to more than the CRM data, which is the prediction of the sales organization's activities and opportunities that they are working on. You actually need access to a number of data sources inside the operation, but also outside of the enterprise. News feeds, LinkedIn, lots of data. And imagine you could then take the forecast from the sales organization and compare that with an AI-generated, what's the most likely forecast. In this example, you'll see that the AI forecast is below the sum of the sales organization's forecast. I'm sure you've never seen that in your organization. But once in a while it happens, and then the last few days before the quarter ends, sales suddenly realizes that they were a bit optimistic. I've seen that happen in some organizations. Now, I always said that winners have a plan, and losers have an explanation. So when this quarter goes bad because the sales organization believed it would be great, and we actually ended worse, then the CEO goes in front of the market and has an explanation. What if we could have that explanation before it happens? What if we could have the explanation about why is the AI saying that the forecast is lower than what the salespeople are saying? So that we could make a plan and avoid that moment where we look like a loser with an explanation. That is about using technology and AI to begin to predict, explain, and recommend what can we do before it happens so that we can steer through that next corner in a proactive way instead of explaining it after the fact. You see where I'm going with this? Can you imagine that boardroom? Now we could go on, and I actually sat down and thought about which questions would I ask as a chairman in my boardroom if I had that kind of capability at my hands. Well, the next question I would ask would not be the forecast, which is very important. It would be about the supply chain. Siemens, we're experiencing record high growth rates. We actually have an order book of 102 billion euros. Never happened before in the history of the company. But that does not translate to revenue before it's delivered. So the revenue forecast for Siemens is actually the supply chain prediction, not the sales order prediction, because that's just adding and piling up on the order stack. We need to deliver. So this becomes critical. And with this, we can see the delays, and we can have the crisis conversations about the port congestion in Los Angeles, but we can also have the strategic conversation about our dependency on some single supplier in Asia, on the chips that make our products intelligent, and without them, we cannot deliver anything. You see where I'm going with this? Now, the next question I would ask is about the assets. At Siemens, we have many assets. How are the assets likely to perform? Not how did they perform the last quarter? Imagine you can increase availability and reliability of your assets. In a company like Siemens, that matters a lot, not our own assets, but the assets we sell to our customers. Siemens recently won a deal in Egypt where we're supposed to deliver 43 fast-speed trains, 92 regional trains, and 43 cargo trains. We're going to build 2,000 kilometers of rail and 60 stations. When this train system is up and running, it will be one of the most modern train systems in the world, in Egypt. And more importantly, Egypt will reduce their CO2 emissions on transportation of people and goods by 70%. Now, one reason that we can win a contract like that is because we have sensors in the trains that allow us to increase the utilization of the assets. So when we bid for a system like that, we bid with fewer trains. And we are still able to move the millions of passengers. That is how important this is. Again, to see it before it happens, not with the rule-based engines that we used to have, but with the predictive capability of seeing that this door may jam. We can, with 92% likelihood, see the door will jam 10 days before it happens, and when we see that early enough, we will prevent that from happening, and the train will have much higher utilization. And my last example is around the ESG. We all have made these commitments to deliver a zero-carbon company eventually. Siemens made its commitment in 2015. We're already 54% reduced compared to the moment when we did that commitment, so we feel good. But I have to admit that when I'm in the boardroom, I don't get this kind of chart that tells me, am I going to deliver by 2030? I would love to have the predictive capability, not just of reporting what's going on and what happened, but what will happen. Are we likely to meet our commitment? You see the chart here, where if we don't do anything, it's going to be maybe in 2070 or something like that. We do have, two-phase approaches. We do need to do more than phase 2. And this will help you tell you what you need to do in addition if you have the explainability and the recommendations. In some companies, I think one of the recommendations will be you ought to leave the company by 2025 and leave the problem to someone else. So, if you believe like I do, that it's not enough to report the past, but we need to begin to predict the future so we can shape the future, then the urgent question in the boardroom that I'm asking is this one. How do we implement AI on top of our current IT landscape, which is complicated enough? And how to do it faster than competition? Because if we are predictive before they are, we're going to manage these curves, these uncertainties better, and we'll get time for strategic conversations because we manage the crisis without being in crisis mode in the board. Now, I have 5 steps, which is my recommendation based on 25 years in the industry, and they are relatively simple to explain, a bit harder to do, but not as difficult as it was to implement the systems of records that I spent 22 years of my life trying to do. The first step I would do is I would try and make an analysis of in which areas of my business would AI, the predictive nature of AI, be of value, and how complex is that? Imagine you could find 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 areas that would give you an assessment of what's the potential value in being predictive with that, and what is the complexity in doing that. Once you have that map, I would go after step 2, which is picking one of those that have medium value but low complexity, because I need to show the organization that this is possible. In this case, ESG, we all need to do the reporting, so why not have the capabilities of prediction as well, so we can become proactive on this topic. Now, that is a relatively easy project to install. It will connect to all of the systems that you have in-house and maybe some of your suppliers for Scope 3. And with that, you begin to get experience about the capabilities of collecting data, unifying data across multiple sources, and, of course, predicting what will happen. Once you have this, you actually have, but you may not have noticed, a platform in-house. A platform that allows you to do the integration to the data, the cleaning of the data, and the application, development, deployment, and operations of AI-type applications. So now you can just use that platform and add the next few applications on top that have maybe even higher value, a little bit higher complexity, but since you're already connected to a lot of the data sources, you will see that the learning curve is now pretty steep. Once you have that in order, I would begin to use the platform to build my own applications, because I actually believe that in certain areas of AI, it is a competitive advantage to have your own way of doing it. So I would identify very high value, very unique applications. I would develop skills in the organization who can use this platform and build at relatively high speed. We're talking weeks, not months or years, individualized AI applications without losing the consistency of the platform. Now with that, you're already way ahead of competition. But I think that with the latest announcements and this generative AI for the enterprise, there's a last step which really changes the game. That is adding to all of this the generative AI product suite. This is almost like democratizing AI. Suddenly everyone in the organization doesn't just look at the past and the reports, what happened already. They can begin to ask questions about the future. Now the OpenGPT or ChatGPT is a marvelous thing. It will give you a song made from Dire Straits, or almost, at least in their style, with 3 verses and a chorus. But it doesn't really know the context. It might even tell you something that's not completely true. Imagine you take this technology into the enterprise, where you don't ask any question you want, but it's enterprise relevant. It is not random data, it is the data that you have signed up for in integrating to this application. And it knows the user. It knows the role of the user. The ability to be accurate, relevant, and to be proactive is dramatically increased compared to a generic, poem writer. And that, I think, will change the enterprise. Now, the only problem with this is that once you give this tool to everyone in the organization, there's really no need for the chairman anymore. But I'll have to work on that. Actually, you could ask the question, what does it mean for the boardroom? And I think it means that the board can now stop being crisis management, can stop dealing with the tactical issues that the organization now is capable of dealing with, because they are predicting what's going to happen. They are ready to turn the car in that corner that is now being predicted, and therefore the board can take a step back again and begin to have strategic conversations. What are those strategic conversations? Well, in my boards, there are 2 dramatically important and very strategic questions. How do we leverage technology to shape the future instead of becoming a victim of someone else shaping it? And how do we turn sustainability not into a reporting activity, but into a business opportunity? I ask these 2 questions in my boardrooms, because in my boardrooms, we now have the issue that we have lunch already at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is a little bit too early. But once you have these conversations, you'll see how you can transform companies in the middle of a crisis. We have dismantled the conglomerate Siemens. We did that already 3 years ago. We have created 3 Siemenses, a Siemens Healthineers, and a Siemens Energy. Siemens is now dramatically accelerating the digitization of critical infrastructures in manufacturing, in transportation, and in urban living, and making the solution sustainable so that Egypt can reduce CO2 emissions in transportation by 70% by using electric and hydrogen trains from Siemens. At Healthineers, we're transforming healthcare by individualized therapy, which makes it not only better, and much, much cheaper, but also much, much more relevant for the patient. In energy, Siemens Energy, we're transforming energy systems from being fossil-based to being renewable energy systems with intelligent transportation and storage of energy, which is the ultimate solution that's necessary in order to do this complete. And finally, at Maersk, the world's largest shipping container company, now a logistics company, we have taken on the impossible task of decarbonizing shipping. We committed to having that done by 2050 in 2018. And before I left the chairmanship last year, we moved that date to 2040 because we could predict that it was possible. Now that is an example of the leadership that I think we need in the times we live in now. We are in this world where the world has become unpredictable. And we have these dramatic changes going on, which does require us to think about how we shape the future. We are in a geopolitical challenging environment. Some talk about globalization reversing. I don't think we should reverse globalization. I think we should transform globalization from being a labor arbitrage where we move manufacturing to cheap locations in very big factories in China to a talent globalization where we get access to the best talents in the world so we can innovate the solutions of the future. Now, those solutions have to do with the climate, because the climate is becoming urgent, and it is not a political, am I for or against climate? I don't think that that's the question. The question is, how could sustainable solutions become the biggest business opportunity ever? I believe it is. And in all the companies I'm involved, it is now how we make our revenue, not how we use our profits. And finally, technology is transforming every industry in every company, independent of size. It's giving us the solutions to the two first problems. We live at this time of dramatic change, and we have an opportunity, if we use technology in a responsible way, and if we lead by technology instead of becoming victims of technology, we can transform not only our own companies, we can transform entire industries, entire value chains to be more relevant, more affordable, and more sustainable. I often say that we are lucky to be leaders in times of such radical change, and even though it does take a lot of effort, I think we have an opportunity like never before to shape a future that is dramatically better than what we have today. With the luck of leading in this time comes an obligation to do exactly that. Thank you very much.